and we'll get into today's content. So thanks for coming along. Let me get my relevant Zoom windows back up so I can see the chat, because that reminds me that we really want this to be as interactive as possible. Please get stuck in. I don't know about you, but my desk, if you are at work, is about the least presentable and professional I've ever seen. I've got wine all over it. Hopefully that means it's gonna be a bit of fun. On that sense, it isn't a sales pitch. It is just to get involved, to share a little bit of our experience, to get stuck in. It's a big part of what we do is to educate, is to help others, to just share the knowledge in an easy, friendly way to help businesses move along. If you didn't catch it before, I am recovering from COVID. In fact, I'm okay. I'm clearly the other side of it. But bear with us if there's anything that trips up along the way. I doubt it will. This is designed to be completely non-technical. If it gets into that usual jargon or babble or anything, please stop. As you probably worked out by now, hopefully I can think on my feet and handle what comes up. I'm really not wedded to the content. I do feel a slight sense here of urgency because we've put together quite a lot. This is material that we normally present with clients. It's bits we pull together that they find really useful, but obviously in the time allowed, I don't know how everyone's fixed for time. There's only so much we can fit in. At the same time, I would be much happier if those who are here today got the most value by answering their questions and got stuck into anything that you may have in mind. We do have something that obviously has a flow to it, and there is a benefit to getting through it. But really, if there's stuff that is important to you, don't be shy. Carrie's here, she'll interrupt. We can unmute you as well and have a dialogue and have a conversation if you're comfortable with that. If on the other hand, this is making sense and just flow through it, please drink the wine, enjoy the ride, and we'll see how we get through it. But interaction is best if we can. So who's it for? Business leaders, anyone who's running a small business. If you have less than 100 staff, you're not going to have a dedicated security team, you're not going to have a dedicated IT team, but you might have a partner that you need to work with, and you want to be confident that you are able to understand and deal with the responsibilities that inevitably come your way, whether you're a COO, CFO, office manager, or somehow the IT and cyber security is either of interest or be put with you. And the idea is that you're armed today with the right questions, you're armed with practical, actionable advice that you can go back and whoever you're working with, no strings attached, your team that helps you with this stuff, that you are in a confident position to move forward and improve what you do. If you're here, I'm assuming you have an interest and you want to learn more. This is a very deep, very wide subject. So please feel free to reach out. We'll cover what we can here. And if we want to run a bit longer, I'm okay with that, but I am also respectful of time. Mainly share, inspire, grow some confidence, have some fun. By way of quick agenda, we'll run through some structured content. I don't know if I mentioned this. We love interaction, questions throughout, interrupt, we'll unmute you and let's have a chat. So this is a common philosophy. I'm not going to start, as everybody does, with stats. We all know about lies, damn lies, and statistics. I think I saw in the BBC News yesterday or today that fraud, in fact, something called authorized fraud, is at the ridiculous levels, greater than ever, and it's grown year on year. If you're here, you know that cyber is something we need to get into. You know that small businesses are underprepared and undeserved of the climate and the attacks and the potential risks that sit to them. But when you talk to people, very often it isn't where it needs to be. For one reason or another, they think it's got it covered. They think my IT company already takes care of that. Or maybe they're just not aware of the risks. So rather than looking at those stats and things, so much of this is to do with human nature and what it means from a psychological point of view, that I thought I'd just approach from that side first. And again, this is how, if we're working with your teams, we might try and help them understand. So when you think about where you live, think about your neighborhood, it's sort of helpful to sort of put that in a security perspective, is because when you live at home, if someone had a break-in, you'd hear about it. I know there's some apps that do this now, but one way or another, people would be vigilant, people would mention it. Everyone knows everyone, you look out for each other. But the reality is your business doesn't operate in those nice, neat, well-to-do areas. The business world is a bit meaner, the streets aren't quite as safe. And if someone had a break-in or something happened, you probably wouldn't find out that you had each other's backs. It's a dog-eat-dog world out there. Awareness doesn't go up. it's kind of kept quiet and brushed under this carpet because people don't want to know what's happened. And ultimately, that ends up creating a false sense of security for everybody. When we think about security, we think it's polished, it's professional, everyone's highly qualified, they've got good experience, you wouldn't mess with them, it's nailed, isn't it? But the reality that we're often dealing with is a little bit different. I love this example. This is the classic that you try and put up a barrier, we have a checkpoint, and the reality is human nature will find the path of least effort and find its way around it. And it doesn't matter if it's multi-factor, passwords, whatever it is, convenience versus security, convenience wins most of the time. And to really illustrate this point, it is all about psychology. This is a little clip from one of my favorite books, Thinking Fast and Slow. It talks about availability bias and the way that your brain works and heuristics. And what we're dealing with is you're fighting against something that's hardwired into our brains through evolution, that if a risk isn't really present, if it's not close to mind or available to you, you're going to ignore it. So cybersecurity, everybody knows it's important, but in a small business, we will end up too busy. Why is that? And the answer is it's psychological, it's human to do so. So given that, where do we start? Well, the first thing you're going to do to overcome any kind of situation where you're up against factors that are against you or outside of your control is some kind of a strategy. And this is the first place where people go wrong. The title of this content is how to get the right cybersecurity without filling a black hole. And the answer is people often get this part the wrong way around. So the first element of your strategy for cybersecurity really needs to embrace people. Not the first thing you think of when it comes to cyber and what have you, but that is the first element that you put together along with process, which might be documentation, all that boring stuff called policy. And then finally, technology. You'll often hear us talk about people, process, technology in that order. And it's absolutely critical that you approach it in that way. If you pick any one of those elements and not get it together, we won't drill into this too much detail, but the ultimate outcome is it doesn't work. If you do nothing, no people, no process, no technology, if you don't address it, you have no defense at all. If you just do the people, well, no ability to execute. If you just do the process, it's wasted effort because no one's following it and you can't back it up. If you just do the technology, which is something you probably see quite a lot, it becomes shelfware, you leave gaps. If you do the other pieces without the technology, it's not scalable and so on. The only way to have success is to have people, process, and technology all on board. And when it comes to all of these elements, actually, it's the leadership, it's the people in charge of the company need to embrace this. It really needs to be cultural. It comes from the top down. You can see this when, somebody, maybe IT or a partner or some people in the office think it's important, but if it's not adopted culturally, it doesn't flow all the way through. Just to reiterate what I think we've said here as well, is that you can have all these things in place. You can have all the measures, all the controls, all the bits and pieces that you think you need to have nailed down, all the technology. But if you're not embracing the people, a user clicks on an email and they might invite someone in. Even with the controls and the protections, you could literally open the door for somebody. So I hope this is making sense at a business level. This should be common sense at this point, and it will drive real value in terms of how to approach this. Keeping on a business level, this is something, again, can be a larger piece that we work through with clients during onboarding. Just help people understand why we're even there in IT in the first place. But today I'm going to do a 1 minute, 30-second version of this, is to really remind ourselves that the only reason you have all this stuff, and the stuff is the IT, it's because of your data. Those in professional services, those are accountants or lawyers, there will be memory of running these businesses, construction, believe it or not, even IT had less IT not that long ago. That's why we call it tickets, because it used to be a physical paper ticket. Buildings have been put up, law, accountancy, professions, architecture, everything was done without computers. It's actually all about the data, the expertise, all the information you need to run the business, to make decisions, the generator that's held. That's what this is all about. And it gets lost. The I in IT, the information gets lost perspective. It's great to have a shiny new computer. Some of the technology around cloud and wireless is amazing, but it's all there to serve the data. And on top of that, the data exists so that you can make or unfortunately lose money in the business based on how you use the data. It's absolutely critical. So that stack there is only there to support what you do. So it's about the outcomes. Funnily enough, most of that actually turns out to be a distraction when you think of what IT is really for. So a very, very simple description of what IT does is about help me get to my stuff. And that includes, can I sign into my laptop? Can I sign into my computer? Can I print? My computer's slow, wireless? All of that really, when it boils down to, is availability. And can I get to what I need to work? Take the device out of it. That device is just there to get you in. So can I get to my stuff? Secondly, is it secure? Can you make sure no one else can get to my stuff? And thirdly, if it goes horribly wrong, can you put all my stuff back? And this is critical because actually that's why you hire and fire an IT partner or a department. Those are the things they're really doing. It's very easy to get caught up in the latest, greatest technology or the laptop or wireless speeds or internet connections, but really that's what it's about. Otherwise, it's just a tool. So bear in mind that's IT's role. Where does that leave us for information security? Something that's really worth touching on, and we've seen this content really help the penny drop with people in business and had a few quite robust discussions over the time. Actually, people have got maybe data that's regulated by FCA or holding other people's very high net worth information, is the role between data owner, which you can say is the small business, and it could even put it down to someone's name in the business, information technology, providing the roles we just talked about, make my data available, help me get to my stuff, and what is essentially a relatively modern, a new role in information security. It's how those three things work together. The data owner is responsible for the data. If it goes wrong, it's going to be your clients that are on the phone to you saying, you had a data loss, somebody read or got access to something they shouldn't have done. Of course, as a business, you're going to be onto IT saying what happened here, but it's a very separate function of what happens of making the data available versus making it protected. Those liabilities, those responsibilities as a data owner don't change. I don't really want to mention the GDPR today, but it's now part of law, European, and we have laws in other countries too, that the responsibilities around who's responsible for the data owner don't shift. So by all means, we may not have contractual obligations with you to help you and help you fulfill your obligations or whatever criteria you need to meet and your responsibilities to your clients, but it's your responsibility. We believe it's firmly our duty to help you understand how to protect that data and obviously provide services to maybe detect or protect and so on as it might need be. So classic one is backup. If that data was accidentally deleted or a system failed, it can be put back. But the responsibilities don't change here. What's really key though is these are three functions that work together, and that air gap between what we call the pizza slice is that there is an air gap. They are separate functions working together. So how do we go about doing something about this and protecting what's important to you as an organization? Rather than what we say is important, there's a number of standards out there. There's a CIS, Centre for Internet Security. You've got the Australian Essential 8. In the UK, the only real certified standard by the government is the very basic Cyber Essentials. We'll have a look at that in a second. And this is NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology from the US. And they have a number of frameworks with a number of more prescriptive levels to them, but the overall framework is the same. And this is important because it's not what we say is important, what you say is important. This is a structure that everyone can stick to. And these phases map to all the different perspectives and ways of doing things. So in a really succinct way, the functions are to identify, to protect, to detect, respond, and recover. And we'll dig into that in just a second. To help understand this, it's often helpful to think of your business as a home. Just as an abstract for a moment, we all have stuff that's important to us. First and foremost, probably family. Then there's things that have an intrinsic value to them. If you have any jewelry, maybe diamond rings, they have an obvious value to somebody else, for example. And then there's things that you'll have that might be expensive, but easily replaceable. Maybe a TV. In lockdown, I think everyone bought bigger TVs to try and finish Netflix. Well, that's an expensive item, but if it went, would you care? Would it, if something happened to it, would it be covered by insurance and easily replaceable? Probably. And then strangely enough, there'd be things that don't really have any material value to anybody else, but you might have photos of children, of family when they're growing up and young, or maybe family members that are not with us anymore that are very important to you. The reason this is a relevant example in terms of business is different assets have different values. Some of those things are valuable to other people, and some of the assets are valuable to you for reasons that are only yours. But rather than saying, well, my data is not worth anything to anybody, or my business and what I hold isn't, there's different categories of data that have different values depending on what you do and what you're holding. Again, this is content that we often do with teams. It can be a very interactive workshop. It's something that really helps drive a culture of security and understanding. You might do this as a kickoff and then do some ongoing training. So today's version is super quick. It's just to give you an overview of what it's about. So thinking about securing your house, there's lots of things you have. I'll pop these up on screen. We like to play a guessing game if we're doing this in person and with your teams. If we do it with your teams later, please don't cheat by knowing the answers. But we have all this stuff. If you think about it, there's doors, you have locks, fence, you have warning signs, you have motion sensors, alarms. We've all got cameras now, so we can get the deliveries and the doorbell cameras, neighborhood watch. You might have a weapon, gone with the British version of a cricket bat here. You'd want the police to turn up and so on. These, at a high level, without digging into it, you think, well, this is all security, isn't it? I've got to have all these things for security. But when it comes to cybersecurity, it's really important to differentiate the different roles they play. So the color coding tells us that all those things are protection. And protection is what we've done for 20 years in IT. You've had antivirus, you've had stuff to try and stop an attack. Having strong doors, solid windows, good locks, and a fence stop someone attacking, stop someone getting into your environment. But the reality is, whether it's at home or in business, IT or otherwise, there's no guarantee. Something you might not have actually put your finger on until now is that the alarm system, the motion sensors, the neighborhood watch, actually even the camera, only help you when an attack is happening. They detect an ongoing attack, something that's happening, that gives you the chance to respond. So the three phases here are very relevant. And it's really important to be clear, because if you miss one element, you can spend more and more money on one side without actually improving your overall security. And that's how it fits into that the NIST phase of cybersecurity. Just want to differentiate. Different security measures have a different role at a different time relative to an attack. So where do you start with that? Step by step. This is some important content now, and the kind of things that you want a bit of action and go away. I hope most of you have got some kind of idea of what you need to protect. Now, the reality is, in small business, if I said, can you give us a list of your either IT assets and your data assets? It's not that easy to put your hand on, but it's a really worthwhile exercise, and we'll see why. With all of this stuff, everything we're going to touch on throws up so many different tasks and things. It can be overwhelming. I don't want anyone to think this is something you're stuck with. This is something you work through over time. It's always a journey, and unfortunately it's never finished, but starting with the right things first makes a huge difference. So what data have you got? Do you have power users that at the moment can access everything? What accounting and HR data do you have? They're normally pretty obvious as something that you want to protect, as well as your applications for running the business. Whether the data is valuable to somebody else, you need it to run the business. It can't be missing. What are the threats that could impact that data? Well, the heading is cyber attacks. So yes, we want to think about those, and specifically what you're probably talking about now are the two ones that do the most damage, either in fraud or interruption or actual financial loss or potential disruption is someone getting access to your email, business email compromise, and or ransomware. And they're hugely complicated in terms of how someone can get access. It's not a one-time thing. Again, it was on the BBC News yesterday. They were trying to explain how week on week somebody might have an attack that starts and takes a month to actually get inside your systems. And they're very much interwoven. So there's not one clear thing, but the idea of someone getting into your system and destroying your data to then ransom you for it, or getting access to your email and using the information therein, never mind the fact that that's actually considered a breach, you have to report it and so on, are the big ones. The things that people don't think of but happens way more often than you think is accidental deletion. The trouble with cloud systems now is if you delete something and you don't notice, by the time you do, it's never coming back, it's gone. And something we've seen as well, firsthand with disgruntled employees, someone who bears a grudge, they go and cause trouble before they leave, or someone's going to start a new company and take certain information with them, or cover their tracks when they're doing a deal or something they've done wrong. And spear phishing, where somebody has some information and they're specifically targeting your organization, very often to get to somebody else. So once you know what you need to protect, what is your current ability to detect and respond to those threats? How would you know something's happening? Apologies for the first acronyms of today, but RTO is the recovery time objective. How long could you stand till you get back up and running? And that needs to be quantified as a business. We'll dig into that in a second when it comes to risk. And also recovery point objective. How far back do you need to go to have a good set of data? Very often, if someone's been in your system, you might need to go back 1, 3, 6 months to get information from before it was corrupted or tampered with. So that is built into your planning and understanding. And when it comes to downtime, it's not just the business overall. You've got to think by business unit, because sales and finance might have a very different tolerance than, say, marketing or admin. So having an idea of which businesses are critical, which units of the business are critical, and which ones to bring back up. And what would that mean in terms of lost revenue? If you couldn't operate, not just the revenue, but the missed opportunities. So I'm not seeing questions on my screen. That in fact, I might grab one in a second. Elliot, I know you're in from Ibiza, so thanks for joining us. I'll come back to that one if that's all right. We'll come back to that. Thank you. If there's more, please jump in as well. What we're talking about here, by the way, that will be absolutely applicable to how you protect any environment. So step 2, this is a really important one, actually, thinking about what you've got in place. So what's our maturity right now? What boxes can we check? If you were given a cart a menu of different elements, from traditional antivirus to have you got your policies, do you have your asset register? Which boxes can we check? What have we got in place right now? Where are the gaps? And then here's the really, really important part here, and it comes back to spending money and getting the most effective cybersecurity, is compared to the assets you just identified and thinking about the risks we've just identified, what's most important, what's most relevant right now to deal with straight away? And then, are there gaps that you're comfortable with? Because it's always possible to do more, but if you're not covering the most important stuff, it's just more money without necessarily getting more protection. If you think in the case of driving a car, if you didn't know better, if the only thing you thought of that would make you safer was wearing a seatbelt, and you wanted to be safer still, there's some kind of logic in maybe wearing 2 seatbelts, or maybe 3. It doesn't necessarily make you any safer, or maybe you buy a better seatbelt. When you understand that you've got to have good tires, the car's got to be good road going condition, good suspension, good brakes, that the steering works, and all of these things have a bearing on safety. And then you think a bit more deeply and go, hold on, I've forgotten the driver needs to know what he's doing, and I need to be on a safe, well-maintained road. You understand that putting another seatbelt on is not going to help. And there'll be certain things that are in your control and certain things that aren't, and certain things that are an easy investment to make and cover most of the risk, and other areas that would just be a waste of money to spend on. So having this approach is the number one thing based on step 1 to avoid a black hole. The recovery phase, as you can imagine, kicks in after an event has happened, or when an event happens. So incident response and recovery. When we do an assessment, nobody in their right mind ticks the box to say, oh, we'll do that later. That doesn't matter. Everyone says, I will do one, and we'll do it soon. But the reality is, in a small business, if you are less than 100 staff, it's such a challenge to get that done, both in time and expertise. It's really tricky. So why is it important to have one? The things you learn from working through the response, and some of them is counterintuitive. Training your staff to not say, oh, we've been hacked, we've had a breach. Having them trained in advance on how to handle that situation becomes one of the most important things. When an incident happens is not the time to start working out what to do. Time is very often of the essence, minutes now, there's a lot of drama, a lot of fuss. When you can lean on a plan, bearing in mind, all plans are useless, but the act of planning is essential. It really makes things go so much more smoothly. One of the first technical things you need to do is not touch anything. Counterintuitively, people think, quick, turn that machine off. Super quickly, if you have an active ongoing attack, the tools that the attackers are using are in the memory of that machine. You don't want to turn it off. You actually want to isolate it and then get the tools out to see what they were doing. One of the first things you'll want to do is call your insurance company. And I guarantee to you, the business owners will always want to know, how did this happen? The answers to how it happened are always in the logs. But if you know you're going to investigate the logs during an incident in the recovery phase, you know you have to turn the logs on before you have an attack. So working through and having a plan and feeding that back with the improvements makes all the difference. So it is really important. So knowing all of this, how do you get the maximum benefit? How do you get the reduction in risk that we all want to see? How do you make the biggest, move the needle without just spending infinite amounts of money? So just leaning quickly back on that NIST framework, here it is broken out a little bit with the phases. We talked about asset management, which is the posh word for knowing where your stuff is, both by assets, physical assets, and where your data is, what you hold. Policies is really important. We'll touch on that super quickly today, but I think small businesses need to have this. Think of it like the staff handbook. Again, we'll touch on it, but there's only so much we can get to. And then we'll talk about actually managing risk in the business, which is where it gets tricky, but where the value comes in. Identify assets, first things first, really quickly. Here's a snippet, it happens to be one of our policies. You need to have it down. We can't expect anyone to know what to do. We can't expect an organization, even a company of 10, 20 staff, if we haven't gone and codified and defined what we expect. If this seems overwhelming, yes, your IT company can help you with this stuff, and it's something to work through on your list of to-dos. It's not hard, you just got to kind of work through it. You can't protect what you don't know. We've seen people who've got, Office 365 sorted out, but then they forgot that they had a hosted application somewhere and that didn't have any protection on it at all. This is really important. Again, from the NIST framework, a risk management strategy is one of the first things to do in the identify phase. It starts up front. And what's nice here, this is the Cyber Essentials questionnaire for GDPR preparation. Do you have a risk assessment? So the writing's on the wall, the clues are here. Risk assessment is the place to start. If it sounds a bit health and safety, I'm pretty sure that the government are going to regulate for this. And I think risk assessments, it's actually just been mandated by the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, that they want this kind of documentation from anyone who's trading and involved in financial services. Doesn't have to be hard work, but as the governing body says, the reality in small businesses, they just don't have one. So this isn't new. This has been around since prep for GDPR. What does that want to look like? Really simply, I might be preaching to the converted here, and we'll dig into this in a second. We'll see how it's really relevant. So just, this is what we're aiming for. This is a high level view, and there's a couple of points that come out of this slide. You need to think about how likely a risk is and what the impact would have. So without scaring anybody, if we said, okay, your application data where all the financial information just disappeared overnight, what would that look like? Or if someone got into your email systems, they're unavailable to you, or email was delayed and so on, what would that mean to a business? What impact would that have? If you missed an email because of malicious activity, would you lose business? And we want to plot that impact against probability. The kicker here is actually think about your business, not again as a whole, but by organizational unit. Think about finance, think about business systems, think about operations, anything that might be client facing, service delivery, marketing, sales. The risk for each of those systems will be slightly different depending on the part of the business. Normally, sales, finance, you will need it back up and running first. For us in IT, it's actually operations to better service clients. That's where we would carry the most risk because it's more time sensitive. So your business will vary both by reputation, both by committed contracts. Accountants, for example, many times of the year, they could probably suffer a bit of downtime. There's certain times of the year when they absolutely can't. So that wants to be built into your risk approach and what you're comfortable with. I've got some examples. I'm conscious of time. I don't know if anyone could put in the chat if they're okay for time. I can expand and contract this little by little as we want. I'm just trying to jump on the notes here. Great, fabulous. If there's any way anyone can indicate any kind of thumbs up if you want to carry on a little bit over, because I'm conscious we're close on time. And I want to just make sure we get some value, arm you with some real practical examples of what's relevant and what we can do. These are things we work through with clients. I'll try and keep an eye on the chats as we go. Lovely. Thank you, Patricia. Brilliant. Appreciate that. And Elliot, love it. For those who have to go, appreciate it. No worries at all. We can regroup. For those that can stay, thank you for your time. And we're talking 5-10 minutes. I can really crack on with this. Thank you for attending. Those that have to jump off, thank you. And thanks for sticking around. Love it. So this is a quick excerpt from the CFC insurance form. This is the underwriters for Hiscox, one of the biggest, actually for cyber, they're pretty good. Why is this slide here? After your name, they obviously, what's their business? They're paying out. They want to know how likely it is that you have a claim, right? So the first question they ask is, do you have multi-factor authentication? Now, if that sounds like an IT question, yes, of course it is. And you've all been arguing about multi-factor authentication with IT because you think it's clunky and it's annoying. But it's the first question an insurer is going to ask to understand how likely things are to go wrong for you. I'm sort of telling it like it is. The next question they ask, and by the way, that can go on your own risk assessment, can't it? You know, yes, no, what does that do for you? Where does it sit on a graph? I'll plot it for you in a second. Do you maintain daily offline backups of all your critical data? The reason that's important is because if it all goes wrong, can you bring it back at all, first of all, and then in what timescales? That's the top questions they're going to ask about understanding where things go wrong for you. Interesting one here. Please confirm the name of your managed service provider. So whether you have one or whether you're doing your IT internally yourself, the fact you have a managed service provider is a risk factor. Who it is has a bearing on the risk that your business carries. I'll whiz through these. Remote desktop protocol, it's the first technical question you see. This is how people get in. There are so many examples of a remote desktop being left open or not protected, and that is just like letting someone, it's an open door into your systems at the end of the day. A really dull one, I think I read an article from NCSE, National Centre for Cybersecurity, yesterday. They'll still tell you from a technical perspective, keeping your systems, so Windows, Mac applications, keeping your day-to-day systems up to date is still one of the most powerful things that you can do from a cybersecurity point of view. The other clue on this page is there's the menu. Those checkboxes are the things you can have. Those are the checkboxes to have and not have. One thing to watch out for on this is what I call checkbox anxiety. You're not supposed to fill them all. It's about having the right balance of them. Actually, of those now, I think we're getting closer to having quite a few, but data loss prevention, for example, unless you have a particular requirement for it, is quite hard to implement, and not everybody does it. The others, again, it's going to show your maturity, if nothing else. Okay, when assessing your own risk, this is something you can do internally. We have a few of these kind of questions is, could you actually quantify how much you spend on cybersecurity? Don't mean IT, we mean cybersecurity. The best practice here is that you have a line for IT services, so support, management, and strategy. You would probably have a line item on your accounts that talks about subscriptions for cloud services. And then you want to have a separate line item for cybersecurity. You want to track back and see, what did we spend? When Hiscox want to know, are you likely to make a claim or not? One of their top things to ask is, are you going to spend more, less, or the same than you did last year? And you can read into that what you want. But clearly, it's something they're expecting you to invest in to reduce your risk. Are you taking the risk seriously? How are you addressing it is wrapped up in that. Really quickly, and this comes up on a recurring theme, who's responsible for IT security? That's not the end of the question. The end of the question says, within your organization, and what's their job role? This can't be handed off. This is what we're talking about on that pizza slice earlier. This is something that the organization owns. When something goes wrong, you are accountable. It's not transferable. I'm sure you'll want to shout at your IT and cyber people. How did this happen? But the responsibility doesn't shift. They want someone within your organization, and they want an experienced and responsible individual. Hope this is making sense. I'm always happy to get thumbs up. It was great to see that interaction a moment ago. Thank you. These are questions. I'm going to call it a risk assessment. These are questions from Cyber Essentials. You can say with section A2, this is not deep into it. Do you have a list of quantities? Do you have a list of computers and virtual machines within the organization? It's the basics. Too many businesses will say, I sort of have, but don't have it down. You can't protect what you don't know about. Here's that same question now asked by Cyber Essentials, government-backed cybersecurity standard, saying, please provide the name and role of the person. This person must be a member of your organization and must be, can't be an outsourced provider. Really important stuff there. So all these questions, if you want afterwards, you can approach us. We can give you the questionnaire from Cyber Essentials. It's publicly available. Form a good starting point. I've pulled these out to sort of show where this is coming from. No technical, these are all business questions. Do you change a password when you believe it to be compromised? Notice how the advice is not, do you change your password every month or every 3 months? It's saying, I'm going to reinterpret this. How would you know if a password was compromised? That's a great question to ask a business. How would you know if something had gone wrong and a password had been leaked? One of the things you can do is quality of password, training staff on how to use passwords, make sure they stick to it, and dark web scanning. If a password comes up on the dark web, there's been a breach somewhere. Great questions come in. All of these points, when it comes to cybersecurity, we don't want it to be like a speed camera. So thank you, Mark. We don't want to slow down, make it all look good, and then speed back up again. This is something you want to do regularly. Some of the assessments we have, we do say quarterly. Sometimes you might do annually, depending on the appetite and also what might have changed in that time. Cybersecurity is always a journey. It's always changing. The threats are changing. What's relevant is changing. Certainly, if you went back 5 years from where we are, it's a completely different landscape. So it is right and proper to assess and reassess, depending on the risk you carry and where you are. Certainly, a few times a year, review these. And in an ideal, and in fact, it's baked into the systems we use, is you might preserve your answers and just change a few as you go. You haven't got to start over. New priorities will come out. And as we'll see in a minute, you're going to create a plan to deal with them in order of priority. That's how you get the bang for the buck. You can't do everything in one go, by the way. In life, I've learned this as I've got older and tried to juggle business and family. Business is absolutely the same. There is no magic wand. You can't do everything. This is always a case of priorities. What do we need to do first? And create a plan. So a roadmap, a budget, a structure to say, deal with the top priorities now, 3, 6, 9 months, and then probably go around again. You will find there's a cadence both of your understanding, your appetite. What seemed really, really hard at the outset, you've got the basics, and then you can build on that. You'll find the understanding and the culture within the business. You'll find industry around you. So financial services is probably ahead on a lot of this. Anyone who really values their IP, strangely enough, now media are really finding that the Apples and the Netflix, so much of what they're doing is totally based around technology now, that it's forcing into an industry where maybe that wouldn't have necessarily been an obvious fit before. And maybe things that, IT might have been saying you must do would have been against taste, but within a few years, they become normal. And even the measures that we're looking at now, which we would call advanced, become standard. So yeah, it's always a cycle of saying what's relevant right now. I'll click through this really quickly. Again, small businesses don't have this covered. Have you taken all the software off that you don't need? Have you taken your users off? What that also says to me is, do you have a robust set of policies? Very rarely does somebody just decide to turn up at your office and say, I'd like to work here. There's normally a hiring process. Have you involved in IT? Some of the questions here actually take, have you got a process for assessing that person's needs before you give them an account? It becomes the basics. It's like, did you lock the door before you left the house? It might seem a bit, it might not be intuitive if you're running a small business. Everything's so busy, but actually it becomes essential. Do you have a pass policy that guides your users? If that seems overwhelming, we can help you with that. You just need to tell them what to do. What's really important here is you can't expect people to do something if you haven't enshrined it in the company handbook. And it can be simple English language, but these are things you need to cover. There's the question about making sure that you've thought out what people need and only give them what they need. This is, again, Cyber Essentials. It's the basics. This is not over the top. This is the stuff to have covered. Right, I'll get through these quite quickly. Same thing. If I said to you right now, how long would it take you to get a list of all your users? I'll ask IT to get an answer in about 2 weeks' time. Do you disable accounts? That says to me is, have you got a nice lever process that you've worked with IT to say, yeah, when someone leaves, this is what to expect. And you need to do it pretty quickly. The number of times this comes up and someone says, oh, well, why are we being charged for these Microsoft licenses? They left ages ago. I said, oh, oops, we never told IT. Not only are you wasting money there on licenses you don't need, but you're also leaving a gap open from a security point of view. This is the one we've been wrestling with, obviously, for many years. It's a cornerstone of cybersecurity. If you're using a computer as an administrator, the potential for damage is that much more. So do you have a formal written down process that is approved by somebody to say, yes, they're allowed to have admin rights? This is coming out of Cyber Essentials. This is that level. And I've highlighted it. If you're running as an admin, you know, the level of access, and in IT, in incidents, there's two factors: is the level of access and the amount of time. If I have all the access and all the time in the world, you can take over anything. This is a trick question. There's two elements to this. Do you have a process? Do you have a risk assessment for both internal and external threats? External, the bad guys trying to get in. Have you thought about employees deleting data? Because that's how you'll lose stuff in Dropbox. Once it's gone, it's gone. The trick is that if you're working through this with us, you're going to say no until I point out the fact that you're actually doing a risk assessment with us right now. And that's going to give you the answer to say yes, but we normally do that for the second time round. The point here is you need to have something. Who in their right mind wouldn't have a business continuity plan? So it's not just backup, it's getting back up and running. Have you thought about your third parties? Now, everybody here, supply chain is the thing. I think everybody here understands it. You are in somebody else's supply chain. People say, well, why would I be of interest? Why be a target? When only can they leverage your data and ransom against you. We had a 25-person business we had to work with late last year. The initial ransom proposed by the ransomware gang was $1 million US, and that was a 25-person business. They thought they didn't hold anything important, but it was important to them. It was existential, obviously, at that point. If you also think about it, bookkeepers might have access to your systems. Guess what? IT have access to your systems. Do you have it classified? Have you been through it enough that you could say, yes, I've had the chat with IT, not just, oh, I hope it's okay. You've got this, right? We've got this now. They've explained to me how they protect our data, our systems. There've been a few high-level attacks. There was a bug in a system called Kaseya, and that gave instant access to all client systems through a tool that IT companies often use. How is that mitigated against? And have you got that tightened up contractually? So GDPR says you need to have a data processing agreement, for example. Have you really got one with your accountant? Have you got one with the bookkeeper? Have you got one with IT? Another view of a risk assessment here. This was another insurance company questionnaire. All the questions we've looked at would be valid for your own risk assessment, by the way, and to plot on the graph. They're all great questions. The one I would highlight here is following a network. How long would it take? Do you have that? Very often people say, yeah, I'll be okay. I asked IT. And when something does happen, actually, A, you can't bring it back, and you can't bring it back in the time you expected. They want a numerical answer to represent the number of hours. So here comes the good stuff. The good news is we're actually right at the end of what we want to cover together. But from those questions, you can produce a map. And this is where rubber meets the road. This is where you can get the best leverage for your money. I've tried to pick a kind of a pleasant enough map. This will represent a medium risk organization. I didn't want to kind of bury anybody or make something that was unbelievable. This is a genuine risk assessment we produced. And it's very clear when you see those questions plotted this way that we want to start with the most probable highest risk. If we're playing the game in the room now, and if we do this together later, don't give it away. But very often at the top right is your users are not trained on cybersecurity. So thinking back to the flippant side earlier, we can do all the cyber, we can sit down, I can write all the policies with you, we can train everybody, we can buy them pizza, they love it all. We can do a lunch and learn and a wine tasting. But if the staff click an email, it's going straight through everything at the end of the day. Even with multi-factor, you can open the door if someone's not switched on and they allow them in. So dealing with those kind of risks, the biggest risks first is the bang for the buck. And typically they are, like we said, Things like, have you controlled remote access? Have you identified the threats? Are you monitoring your network? Are you looking at the logs for signs of intrusion? Are you dealing with vulnerabilities? Have you trained the staff? And when you look at this, it's a lovely experience to work with people that have been, stuck with cyber, that we do the assessment and they come through and go, this makes sense to me. If we address these dots on the right, we can literally move a dot from here to here. We can say, let's create a plan. Let's address these gaps. Let's put a budget against them and say, these ones have got to be done tomorrow. We can't leave that door open any longer. But this one we'll do 3 to 6 months from now. Maybe we expect to do a deal with a company and their terms of business will be, you need to have certain measures in place. Okay, well, we'll do that then. That's how you can spend the right amount of money and make the biggest difference, by only covering the risks that matter and not putting on 2 or 3 of the same seatbelt. So I think we've done this with a number of people here before. If anyone is interested in this resonates for you and makes sense, we'd be happy to do the risk assessment. It actually doesn't take too long, but we can get to this map of a questionnaire-based, non-technical business level that you can use with your board and drive a strategy and create a plan from. So in summary, once you've got those elements, it's about creating a plan, seeing what gaps you have, see what the most important ones are right now, set some timescales and budgets, and come up with some kind of, this is a very posh way of presenting it, but some kind of plan over time that's going to make a meaningful difference to cybersecurity. I think, and I'll come back to Elliot's question, but we are there. My contact details are here. Please reach out. I'd be happy to chat to anyone that wants to get into this. We believe in helping others. There's no strings attached. It's not a sales option. I'd be interested to learn about your businesses and see where you are and see how we can add value and see what we can learn. That would be